Hello everyone, here is Vladimir from Tech Divisions and I welcome you once again to one of my tutorials. These tutorials will be much longer than the previous ones. This will be about a very favorite subject of mine, Angular framework. So it's called like this. Now, what is the Angular framework and what it allows you to do? Angular is a framework developed by Google. In Google, there is a team called Angular team, and this team developed a longer time ago, almost 10 years ago, a version of a JavaScript framework, which was called AngularJS. This stands for simply Angular JavaScript. So this is today known as the first version of Angular. And then the second version of Angular arrived in the year 2017 in April or May, and it's called Angular 2.0, or all over the internet as Angular 2 Plus, or simply just Angular. The difference between these two is that the first one was developing the software in JavaScript. It's the most known language in the world. It runs in every single browser of every single application. This JavaScript actually allows dynamic that you can normally see on the website. Everything dynamic which is on the website is actually done by JavaScript. Any kind of animations can actually be done also by CSS. That will come later, but JavaScript is responsible for all the stuff like, for example, opening, closing menus. For example, games are created by JavaScript, and so all kinds of animations, processing of the data, calling servers for data, showing data to you as user, and many other things. Now, what AngularJS could do was single-page applications. What AngularJS was doing differently in comparison to the other frameworks which were before AngularJS. Before AngularJS there was, for example, jQuery, and that was even supported by Microsoft. This was still around the year 2012. So what was different was the so-called SPA. What SPA stands for? Single page application. Single page application is a web application which looks like one single page, but in reality it contains unlimited amount of pages, so you can practically click yourself through a single page application. There is a master page, and the master page can bring you to all other pages while you're not entering the server part. What I want to explain is that before single page application, there would be a request going to backend with each your click or change to a page inside of your application. Before SPA, there would be lot communication with server, and server would give every new page back. But while using SPA, server would be contacted only one time at the beginning, and the rest of the work would be done on the client side. Client side equals frontend. This is what you see in the browser. This is sort of small revolution which arrived with AngularJS. AngularJS was bringing also another type of feature, and this was dual binding of values. This means you would declare something like a variable, and that variable would be bound to something like an input box in the front end in the browser, and at the same time this input box would share a variable which you can then use for any other purpose. Practically whatever you write into input box you would share with the variable, and whatever would come as a change in that variable would show off in that input box. This was an incredible revolution, but had some downsides to it. With too much data, slow. There was a problem. Also, problem was JavaScript. It was error prone because it didn't have a compiler. The problem with this was that you would be able to write only small applications in such a way that you would have an overview over the errors that you made. But the bigger the application, the bigger the amount of unresolved problems piling up and hard to find. Things like these were leading to a second version of Angular. The Angular team at Google has taken many problems that were reported by developers like me into account, and they released this second version of Angular. And the second version of Angular was totally remade, and the language was not anymore a vanilla JavaScript like with the previous version of AngularJS. It was Typescript, and what this offered on top, TypeScript practically understands everything as JavaScript does, but it's type safe. And what it means, so while in vanilla JavaScript, I'll call it JS, you would write a variable like, for example, this, and this would be it. You would declare a variable using the word let or using the word var, and this would be it. Then later in the program, you would assign, for example, name equals quotes Vladimir. In this case, it would become a string, but you could have made also an error, and you would say name equals 123, and in this case it would become a number, and this would be a problem. This is not really a type-safe way of writing applications. Type-safe means that you actually declare a variable like this. Variable name is a string, or for example, variable date of birth would be a date. And in this case, if you assign to the date of birth somewhere later in the code something like 123, then the compiler, not compiler actually, this is a transpiler. We are not compiling code in Typescript, we are transpiling it. Transpiler would tell you this is an error, my friend. You have an error here. Date of birth cannot be 123. It automatically accepts only a variable of a type date. So this is a valid assignment of a value of the type date in a type-safe TypeScript. Angular is in the version 11 at the time of the creation of this tutorial, and this is one big difference: TypeScript and not JavaScript. Second big difference, you can have dual binding of variables became optional only. So you can actually decide whether you are binding the value of a variable to an input box, or you are binding the change in the value of input box to variable. It goes either one way or another. So for example, if you have input and that input has got some value, you can use ng model to assign the value to a variable, simply like this: my variable. This would be a valid assignment of a variable with a dual binding. So this will go both ways. These brackets are responsible for assigning of the value to input box, and curly brackets are responsible for assignment of a variable from input box to variable, which you can then later use to save values into a file. These are the two biggest differences up to this day. This enables a lot higher speed, and last and not least, transpiler, very fast, very accurate, which points to errors. And this is why the second version of Angular is the more efficient version of Angular. Anytime you hear that AngularJS is more efficient, this is not true. Whoever is using this is very far behind and is truly not using much of really high-speed dynamic software development, and it slows down your own, I would say, inner development on the part of a software developer. Now the question is, what you can use Angular framework for? Super fast, super dynamic web applications, well designed. You can do anything in this framework, that you can write not only web applications, but you can take those web applications and you can insert those web applications into so-called WebView in Android. Suddenly you have mobile application. I've done this before, web applications into mobile applications by inserting them into so-called web views, and I released those on Google Store. I also did the same thing with the iOS. So in iOS it's WK, that's the right name. This is something where you will call from inside of the code in iOS your web page, and you will embed this web page in your application, and your application will practically be running on an iOS device, a mobile application. You can do the same thing on Windows and the same thing on a Mac. You can practically use it for any platform. You can develop code in a super fast way. And we are going to try all of this together. So I hope I will inspire you this way to create applications in Angular. We are going to create not only web applications, but we are going to take those web applications into Android, iOS, Windows and Mac. As long as you will have these systems available on your site, you can follow, and please like, comment and subscribe to my channel. I see you soon, and I will do my best to guide you on your way of becoming a software developer.